Okay, welcome back. This is the first of our review talks, and this one is going to cover biology education. And to do that, nobody better than Professor L.S. Shashidhara, Shashi as we know him. Shashi is the director of NCBS, TIFR is National Center for Biological Sciences, but he has also been instrumental in setting up biology at IISER Pune, and he also maintains an affiliation with Ashoka University. So you see all the names listed here. Shashi, of course, is research-wise known for his work in genetics, evolutionary biology, cancer biology, etc. And he did his undergrad and postgrad from Dharwad and then at the University of Cambridge in the UK. And again, Shashi has won all the prizes there are, Bhatnagar Award, Fellow of all the academies. More importantly, he was the vice president of the Indian National Science Academy for a while, Secretary General of the International Union of Biological Sciences, and President of the IUBS. And in this time, he was very closely involved with policy research on global change, zoonosis, the project of IUBS looking at international efforts at climate change education, he has facilitated various activities looking at training of more than 10,000 school and undergraduate teachers to promote inquiry-based learning. So I think that is really important and the right person to tell us about biology education. So over to you, Shashi. And yeah, just keep about 10 minutes. You have it for questions.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, you can hear me, right? I'm using the column mic. Okay, good. Thanks. Thanks, Arnab. Thanks, Mayuri. Thanks, Mashood, for this organizing this conference and inviting me. It's an honor to be here. Yeah, thanks. Although, while I was in Pune, used to come to Mumbai very often. HBCSE perhaps only a couple of times. The last time was 15 years ago. But today morning you mentioned about Dr. Pradhan. I also interacted with him a lot. We conducted a couple of teachers training programs together in Pune, and also we worked together in DST committee on teachers training programs, science teachers training programs, particularly at the school level. We miss him here today. I think what HBCS is doing is research on education. It's particularly science education, right? Because that's why it's HBCSE, science and mathematics. Now, some of them we actually intuitively learn, right? We learn quite a few things. As children, they grow, they learn quite a few things about their surroundings. They learn from parents, they learn from others in the family, or when they interact with outsiders. The first thing that they need to learn in modern society, unlike perhaps 5,000 years ago when they are in smaller groups, in small, like not even a village, even could be a smaller than a village, smaller groups of people. First thing in the modern society they need to learn is how to deal with non-family members. You can call them as strangers to start with, right? So social skills. For that requires language skills. Most important is the language skill. The second is they had to get on to day-to-day life with other people. So they had to learn numerical skills, right? These are the two most of the important things. So much of the early, the research on education was all about how students or children learn, right? Some cognitive skills. With better understanding of neuroscience, better understanding of how brain functions, how we perceive, how we understand, how we make our own judgments without even verifying the facts, because all of us have limited perception, right? But science has provided us a way to understand the world, understand ourselves and understand our surrounding world beyond our own perception, beyond any human's perception. It's not individual perception. That's what objectivity about understanding the world is, right? For example, Galileo's heliocentric theory goes beyond any human perception. Even today, no one on Earth who is sitting here, 7 billion people, would have seen Earth moving around the sun, right? But it's, what they see every day is the sun going from, east to west. Similarly, our perception about the world is based on how small thing we can see, how distant thing we can see, how we can, differentiate between, for example, all the stars are in the same level. although they are million years apart from each other. And also we cannot see all colors, we cannot hear all the range of the sound waves, right, decibels. So given this, we have a limited perception of the world, but the world is beyond our perception, and with the help of whatever the sensory organs in the brain that we have. Now, what do you need to know? Why do we need to know? The question comes. For example, I'll come to that in a minute. We have evolutionarily evolved another animal, and but somehow we have built ourselves a new cultural world, and in this cultural world we try to understand beyond our own perceptions. The reason we need to learn how to understand the world beyond our own perception is because in day-to-day life, in the human world too, a lot of things need to be learned, need to be understood beyond human perception, right? Otherwise, one person's or one particular group's perception will dominate over others, and then the objectivity will be lost. And we see every day, we experience every day, the history is full of these kind of conflicts, wars, very different kinds of problems, is simply because one particular perception dominates over other perceptions. If you have to have one perception, which is what you call as understanding of the world, which is very objective understanding of the world, science education provides a way to understand this. Once you understand how we understand the natural world, let's say beyond non-human natural world, hopefully at some point we'll start understanding our own world, our own society, our own life and our own existence as a societal member in much better way, and hopefully we can be a better citizen, what we call as scientific temperament in the society, right? So obviously, research on education, research on science education is much more important in the modern society, given the size of the society, how much information flows around, and how much in real time we get information, in real time we have to take decisions in very different aspects of our life. And in that context, education in biology is also equally important, because first of all, we have to understand our own limitations. We have to understand our own existence, right, in the context of the natural world around us. When we talking about what is living or not living, almost everybody would know intuitively some difference between living matter versus non-living matter. But then how do you define what is living matter or what is life? It's always a problem, right? But now science has able to provide a lot of answers to this. I'll come to that in a minute, how to even teach a young kid in that the very, very complex question about what is life. But at the same time, when we teach biology, in fact, even IIT, so-called IITs were supposed to be engineering colleges in India. They're meant to, build things and fast-tracking their education so that India can be built in the way in the other Western developed countries are built. But now biology has been made compulsory in all IITs. The reason is, understanding biology helps us to not only understand ourselves as another evolved animal, so that we can actually relate much better to our surrounding living environment, and at the same time, our own better understanding of life, we should be able to get a better solution or more sustainable solutions to the problems of life, right? It could be health or environment. So that's sort of the crux of what you call as sustainable living, and it's also a fast-changing world, right? I'm sure we don't have to tell this particular audience what actually it means, fast-changing world. There are two aspects to the fast-changing world. That is, one is the physical world. Because of the climate change, we are facing too many unpredictable changes to the weather every year, every season. At the same time, the society is becoming more and more dynamic. The dynamics of the society depends on the interaction between individuals. Past, the interaction was slower. For example, Manjul mentioned about Fibonacci number, who discovered what, who first actually, understood. It's not discovery, it's a discovery actually, because the natural system have the patterns which follow the Fibonacci numbers, right? But those days, things were moving much slowly. If, for example, if I understood something about nature or something about my surroundings, or invented a new technology for agriculture. It would have taken centuries to spread that information to other societies and other cultures to know and practice it. But today it happens in real time. Because it happens real time, we continuously exchange information, and society changes much faster. The kind of jobs students are preparing for during their early, and particularly undergraduate education or higher education, those jobs would be gone by the time they actually ready to take up their jobs. So in a way, how do you prepare them for their future? We are not preparing them for today, right? We are preparing for their future, which future could be 5 to 10 years from now. And can we predict what would be the nature of the jobs that they need to do, whichever the profession they take up 5 to 10 years from now? And if we cannot predict, then how can we even teach what we need to teach, right? How we teach, what we teach, it all becomes a problem if we cannot predict the future. But in my time, for example, it was very obvious. Although I went to a more professional degree program in agriculture, genetics and plant breeding, there also it was very clear, food was a major problem. More and more jobs are available for developing new varieties, and there will be lots of jobs for people who want to do plant breeding and genetics. But let's say if someone had done a BA or BSc, there was a somewhat, as guaranteed, if they do well, you'll get a job in railways, bank, LIC, right? Only one insurance company at that time, and perhaps civil service or whatever, state or central, civil service. So they could prepare. 5 years later, I will become this, or 10 years later, become that. But today, most of those jobs may not be available, except perhaps so-called government jobs, which no one is interested anyway. So let's see what. So that's what today's discussion is. I'm not giving you an answer. I'm only raising these issues that we can all discuss together. And each society, each region, each language, people with different languages, people with socio-economic backgrounds, first-generation learners, which is the largest in India, each one of them had to decide for themselves. And if they can't decide for themselves, an organization like HBCSE or this kind of a gathering, we need to sort of brainstorm and see whether we can come out with certain kinds of solutions, practical, implementable solutions. In fact, I'm more interested in teachers training, like Manjul also mentioned, in-person teachers training, in-service teachers training, because that's very, very important, because we need to transform the society today. We don't have much time left. So while we start, that's what one of the problem I'm also facing with this curricular modification is one textbook at a time, 6th standard, 7th standard, 8th standard. By the time we finish this, 6 to 7 years is gone, right? Same thing will happen if we start with new teachers. By the time we train new teachers and start spreading to the whole country, it will take 20 years. What about, the 20 years of, these are almost like 2 generations in the education field, right? So given all of these things, we need to somehow fast track the modification of the education system that comes with teachers training, involving teachers in pedagogical innovation. I'll also talk about it in a minute. So hopefully I finish everything in another 40 minutes. Okay, there's a clock on that side. Okay, global problems, climate change. Climate change's impact is not the same in everywhere. Different parts of the world will have different kinds of impact. Even pandemic kind of thing is also product of the modern society, and as well as the climate change. More zoonosis can happen because of human-wildlife interactions and conflict, and also the spread of a virus or a bacteria from one place to another place is much faster now. We don't have much time to control if it moves so fast because of the extreme mobility of the modern society, human mobility. So because is more uncertainties and reduced predictability. In fact, there is with the history of science, people generally say the very origin of science is to make predictions of the future, right? People wanted to predict certain things. People wanted to have certainty for tomorrow. So that's how the science began, and irrespective of whether it's true or not, there may be other school of thought that science started simply out of curiosity, just to see the patterns, like what Manju spoke about, right? And but in any case, this is the world that we have today, and more such uncertainties tomorrow, right? So now, we also have to worry about, as a society, as a nation, as a humanity, all nations too, what kind of growth and development pattern we need to follow if given all of these problems that we are facing across the globe. Are we not going to spend more time on environment and sustainability rather than simply the mad race for so-called growth and development, right? So when we call ourselves a developed country, do you want to be associated in a group of nations which we call themselves as developed country, or we need to call ourselves a developed country because of certain kinds of society we live in, equity, some kind of awareness about environment and sustainability and so forth. Again, it's only thoughts. I don't want to be preachy in my talk here. And most importantly, we know whether we are practicing an agriculturist like a farmer, irrespective of their education background, or most accomplished researcher in the area of education and health, we know that our environment impacts a lot both food and agriculture, health, right? So our health is directly sort of dependent on how good the environment is, right? So-called public health burden. When you say public health burden, anything that impacts the infrastructure of health givers, right? Whether it's public or private. Like what happened during COVID pandemic, almost every hospital, every ward, every bed was completely filled with COVID patients, and there was, that public health burden increased several fold. That's what we say, right? So environmental security is important for both, for good food, nutrition, as well as health, given the population size is an enormous problem for India. So this is the question I already asked in the beginning. What is the education system that we need to plan for the future, right? Now, this is the, of course, statement which more or less taken from NEP. NEP says that we need to prepare our students or everyone in innovation skills. They need to sort of have a locally relevant scientific solutions for very different problems of the society, particularly climate change and other things, right? It is the spirit of the NEP. It's not the same word what is mentioned in the NEP, right? Most importantly, NEP also says is decentralization and flexible educational practices, which can be curriculum, syllabi, assessment system, and all things, right? In fact, Manjul also mentioned in the morning, in fact, in 47 pages, 47 or 67 pages of NEP, it comes again and again, decentralization, curricular flexibility, curricular autonomy, right? And at the same time, it also comes about the assessment autonomy. One of the things we need to teach our teachers is to how to assess and then do the reverse, invention for or innovation for pedagogy, right? But if you know, first of all, when you start doing assessment, you will also understand the diversity of the classroom. Socioeconomic diversity, language diversity, both will have an impact in the learning ability. And learning ability, diversity in learning ability will immediately be known to teachers at the beginning of the class itself. Then only they need to start thinking about what are the different ways I can teach, so that every day at least some group of students will be attentive and learn something. And if it happens over 3 or 4 days, if at least every student will get an opportunity in 4 lectures, subsequent lectures becomes easier for the teachers to teach and the students to learn, simply because they start engaging in the classroom much better, right? So there are multiple ways we can innovate our pedagogical practices, but we need to understand our classroom to start with. But if you are only teaching the front row students, we can never understand what's happening to the remaining 90% of the students in the classroom, right? So that autonomy will come to teachers only if you give them that autonomy. To give them autonomy to develop their own pedagogical method, develop their own, even the syllabus, and also assessment. But unfortunately in India, whether in the school or in the colleges, we have taken away that autonomy, right? We give them a textbook. So somewhere in the university there's a committee which decides what should be the syllabus. Of course, curriculum is decided by UGC centrally. I'm talking about higher education now. let's talk about school education separately. May not be, I'm not really so conversant in school education. I'm more familiar with higher education. So the curriculum is decided by the UGC for the entire country. Each university will come with its own, set of syllabi for different topics. And according to the syllabus, some textbooks are prescribed or some textbooks are written. And the question paper is for the examination is set up by another committee. Evaluation is by done another committee. The teacher somewhere here and there struggling to connect the dots. But the students, they know if they read the textbook, remember the textbook, they can write the examinations, at least whatever, to pass the examination, because there is also called no out of syllabus questions. No critical thinking questions are allowed in the examination. Because of this, there is really no respect for the teachers, there is no engagement with the teachers, unless someone is inherently interested in learning something. So this is going on for several decades now, and how to sort of change this. Changes, we are hoping that NAP will bring such changes. Unfortunately, some of the immediate implementation practices that UGC is trying is actually going against the spirit of NEP. For example, central assessment system or centralized admission system and all. Hopefully, they will change that one and bring in more decentralization to our education system. As a teacher, so far what I discussed is what people, the policy makers, decision makers had to think about it. But now let's talk about, irrespective of what the system is, what is that as a teacher I need to do, right? I'm still following the same textbook, I'm still following the same syllabus, can I still improve my teaching? In fact, much of the teachers training program which is going on in the country is all about putting an effort to improve the quality of teaching, irrespective of who decides what to teach, how much to teach, how the students are assessed end of the semester or end of the year, right? So one thing is, you have to have an understanding that we have to prepare our students for their tomorrow and not for ours today or our tomorrow, our yesterday. Because what we have learned is yesterday. My yesterday, for example, when I learned genetics, it was almost like 40 years ago or even, right? And now if I try to teach that genetics today, I should, first of all, there may not be any change in the topic. There are some topics that have not changed much because genetics, Mendelian genetics, sorry, we may have deeper understanding. It doesn't mean that we have a completely different, new science there. Same thing in physics. But even then, there is so much advancement, so much new methods of teaching. So we need to use the way of teaching to the today's students, because their receptions, our attention, what they want to do in their life, what other dynamics of the society which are impacting their learning ability, all those things we should have it in our mind before we start teaching. But there is a solution. Solution is, in fact, today's world, we consider what a problematic world because we belong to the yesterday's world, but the today's world has its own strengths. That strength we should exploit. Now, one of the strengths of today's world is you don't need to worry so much about the content. Content is there. Although, you want to raise your hand and switch off the mobile or keep it on silent mode. Let's say you keep it only in silent mode, don't need to switch off. But you can continuously, even in the classroom, you can keep on looking at the content, right? Assuming that you only look at the subject that is being taught in the classroom and not other contents. But it's the click of a button, you get any information that is available. But what you need to learn is how to find a reliable source of information. Because information is information. It's actually, word information is wrong for that word. There's a lot of noise in the internet. How to extract information, how to extract signal, how to extract knowledge from that is what is important. So in a way, students should learn analytical ability, right? Because they don't need to really learn physics or chemistry or biology or some of those things. Of course, some fundamental concepts you may have to teach to start. It's like a primer. You don't really need to teach beyond the primer, because the rest they can learn on their own if you develop analytical ability. Second is ways to connecting the knowledge to the problem to identify solution, what we call as innovation in one word. But innovation doesn't have to be only solving a real life problem, right? For example, what Manjul was talking about in the morning, let's say you identify, can you apply this number theory to understand like very different ragas, how they are connected, right? Now, Carnatic or Hindustani classical music raga system, right? So that's a problem we are giving them, asking them to solve that problem using the number theory you learn in the classroom. And that itself will the ability to apply what is known to an unknown place and try to solve that problem. And that's exactly what innovation is all about, using science to solve real life problems, right? It could be food, it could be health, it could be any other problem. Critical thinking, again, it's a very abstract word. I mean, we cannot teach critical thinking. You can't say that today I'm going to take a class on critical thinking and tell students that, let's talk about critical thinking, right? It has to be experienced. It has to come by practice. One way to critical thinking is asking the students to verify themselves, why this particular information is correct, why you think that the whole world is thinking in this particular way, and why not in some other way, and see whether there is an alternate view of the world also. And that makes them to start thinking. Like reviewing a paper is a critical thinking. It could be reviewing someone else's paper. It's a critical thinking process that all scientists go through this, right? Typically, all PhD students, those who do, even the master students, first chapter immediately called, background literature or literature survey, and then end of literature survey or the end of the first chapter, they formulate a question and then write 3 or 4 objectives. If it's a master thesis, typically 2 objectives, a PhD thesis, or 4 or 5 objectives, right? Now, that actually is critical thinking. How do you summarize what is known and then extract what is to be still discovered, and what is that you can discover using the resources that you have? That itself is a critical thinking process, right? And self-learning ability, that's the most important. The world is changing so fast, new information is coming, new opportunities may come for professional life, personal life, some new challenges may come in professional and personal life, and you need to learn on your own. No one is going to teach there, right? Beyond the classroom. And that's what's called continuous learning, lifelong learning. That comes typically, again, if you do some kind of a research in the classroom or during the degree program. So now the problem comes is how to integrate research in a country of ours with such large number of students, and where student to teacher ratio is sometimes more than 1:50, 1:100 in some organizations, right? So one is the way we are trying to do in science, at least, if not in other areas, we have a lot of internship program for undergraduate students, postdoc, anyway they have to do research, PhD is all about research. At the same time, even if you cannot have a internship program for every student in every corner of the country, one way is in the classroom itself we can convert a lecture into a more like a discussion. In a way, a PhD supervisor and the PhD student would be discussing a particular problem, right? So it's called research integrated education on a known topic, right? I'll come to that in a minute, and I'm sure there will be talks by Asim and Neerja who are here, or either a poster related to this, where IISER Pune developed a research integrated pedagogical methods. That's where we did a lot of undergraduate teachers training across the country, all the way from Lakhimpur and Pasighat in northeast to Bhatinda in the west and south in Trivandrum and in every part of the country. About 5,000 teachers went through this teacher training program, and many more hundreds within Maharashtra, because it was closer to IISER Pune to organize such programs. It's continuing even today. Now, so this again, it's only about for discussions. I'm sure in the next 4 days you're all discussing this. Many of you are already experts in this. But when we talk about teachers training program, some of these principles should be taught to them, how to teach using these kind of thoughts in mind. One is science should be taught the way scientific information is discovered, rather than simply the content to ask them to memorize, right? It's simply DLA double helix. I'll come to that in a minute. It's such an elegant molecule. There's no point in go on looking at the chemistry of that molecule and trying to sort of ask them to memorize everything about that DNA double helix. The discovery itself tells you so much about what is expected out of it, right? And what the structure is going to tell us about how genetic information is stored, how it is used, decoded for any biological functions, and how it is inherited generation after generation, and how information is maintained, the integrity of the information or fidelity of the information is maintained generation after generation. Everything is already embedded. During the discovery process, these are the same questions they were asking. If the structure is somewhat like this, perhaps no, it will not be like this, because it will affect the integrity of the information during the transfer, or it will not be able to generate some new information and so forth. So a lot of these things can be taught in a very interesting way. Students should be involved, should give some assignments, ask them to do it in the classroom itself. Outside, maybe anytime they may not be able to do it. Give them 10 minutes break and say, like, solve this problem, and then we'll discuss again, kind of a thing. Or group, particularly they also need to learn team learning, and because the future of the profession is anyway working in teams. There is no one is going to work in isolation, whether in the public or private organizations. And all of these methods of what we do, all of us do research, whether you research on education, research in biology, chemistry, physics, we follow certain logic and how we do research, and certain steps we follow in a certain sequence. And if the same thing is followed while teaching, half the job is done. And more importantly, whatever you do in the classroom, there should be a reward to the student. Otherwise, students will not do it. It's a reality. We should accept this. I don't think we should shy away saying that let's give some 10 marks. That's why decentralization helps, Manjul. If teachers can keep aside certain marks, what is called continuous assessment, and that continuous assessment will help to reward students who get involved in these kind of learning practices. Now, there was supposed to be another slide in between. But anyway, when it comes to teaching any subject, particularly so is more complex like biology, you also try to bring in some real life things that they see every day. But what is real life is so different from different parts of the world. Like, for example, we talked about climate change. Climate change is the most important problem of today, and how to bring in climate change awareness, how to tell them what is the cause of climate change, what is the impact of climate change. Because 1.5 degree average temperature compared to 200 years ago, why it should be so catastrophic to the whole Earth, considering the Earth is such large, right? And 70% of it is the ocean. Why there should be such huge problem? Why there is so much of, why scientists are making big noise about climate change? People are asking this question. Trump asks always this question, right? So, sorry, I'm very upset about it. Anyway, so, so we need to somehow bring in some of those, problems of today's life or tomorrow's life into the classroom. But if you bring it in like an appendix, for example, in environmental science education in this country, because Supreme Court told that every student should get a physical education at undergraduate level, there is a course. But it is like lip service, because it is not added to your rank, it is not added to your total degree. Only thing is you have to pass, right? And there is no one there is no engagement in doing environmental science education in this country, except in master's level, where there is a separate department for environmental education or environmental science, and they are more engaged because of students' interest and teachers' interest. Coming to climate change education, or any education, if you bring in some real life problem, but it should be, first of all, seamlessly integrated. It should not become like a problem for the sake of solving a problem. It should be seamlessly integrated. They should realize in their own life. But climate change, there is another problem, because many times they cannot realize if it is not visible to them, right? Typically, if you know the best example of climate change, if you do an image search for climate change, you will see a polar bear standing on a piece of ice, right? How many Indian children consider this as a problem? They consider it as a spectacle, fantastic. It's a polar bear is standing on a piece of ice surrounded by water, right? For them, it's not a problem. It's only a photographic spectacle. So that's why it is important So when we were doing, as part of IUBS, climate change education project, actually it was based in Pune, it's still continuing, there's a team working on it. We developed a large number of proof of concept lesson plans, right, on climate change education, where you bring in seamlessly, as per the syllabus, some climate change related problems, so that, and the local problems, so the students understand it. But obviously it has to be developed by teachers. So all our training and workshop for teachers is to develop pedagogical methods or develop new lesson plans for themselves, rather than we telling them what to teach. They themselves would come out with. This is from Uganda. So the Ugandan teachers, when we were discussing this, they themselves came out with an idea. So for example, teachers who teaching in biology, botany, and various different photosynthetic pathways, and I'm sure you all know, those who learn biology have learned biology, C3, C4, CAM plant. There are 3 different systems of carbon fixation, and CAM is supposed to be more efficient than C4, C4 is more efficient than C3, and so forth, right? And it turned out to be that in Uganda, because of the climate change, when there is a landscape change happened, and started losing the forest coverage, right? And not because of forest, cutting the forest. It's actually climate change caused, forest change. And again, Uganda is also a large country. The North Uganda is mostly grassland, and the southern part is more thick forest, is on the equator, and where gorillas and chimpanzees are plenty in number, right? But they're also an endangered species because of diminished forest coverage. And they thought that when teaching this, they were teaching like a bamboo, for example, is a much faster growth. It is a CAM plant, it is better photosynthesis, it grows to lag phase, and then log phase, and the log phase, and then it goes to a place where the rate of carbon fixation stabilize, is sort of plateaus and then start declining with the age of the plant. So if you keep cutting and then growing new plant, you can continuously fix the carbon, you can trap the carbon as much. It also grows in dry conditions, it doesn't need so much of water. All these things basically were easy for them to teach. It so happened that one of the solutions for climate change in that region in Uganda was growing bamboo forest, right? And that's one happened. An anthropologist or primatologist, a combination of primatologists, those who work on great apes, they're a combination of both anthropologists and primatologists. Those who work only on monkeys, they are primatologists. And here, they were also found out that one way to bring in about conservation science is to tell them locally what's being done. For example, the bamboo shoot turned out to be a good food for the mountain gorillas, and then mountain gorillas in number started increasing. In the major conservation efforts for endangered species of mountain gorillas, they were actually growing bamboo in the surrounding areas. So in a way, the 2-3 lesson plans were brought in, where whatever they need to teach in the classroom, some local examples were brought in, and that helped to, of course, the feedback from the students, such that it apparently helped their engagement in the classroom and learning better. But 1 or 2 topics they learn like this better. They learn how to learn, critical thinking, analytical ability, and the future classroom-based learning. Even if you teach the way typically what we teach in the rote learning method, it still has some positive impact. Okay, so in the next 15 minutes, I'll talk about more biology specific, although I already took 1 or 2 biology related examples. Now, I really don't know answer to this, right? It depends on the teacher, it depends on the students, it depends on what does that student want to do later. But it's very difficult to decide a syllabus, right? Why we need to teach biology, I already explained. It's very important because we are part of the living system. We need to have understanding about our own self, and if we understand ourselves in the surrounding other biodiversity around us, then we should be able to better relink ourselves to other surroundings, and the sense with our dependence on the biodiversity also will come out very clearly if they learn biology, particularly ecology and evolution. At the same time, we also will start learning our own limitations, because the biological complexity and the kind of, for example, insects have UV light, UV vision, The bats can have ultrasound vision and a variety of different other abilities of other organisms will also make us feel that we are evolved with very limited perception, and our own perception cannot be the real world picture. So in a way, why is easier to explain? What, how, and how much? Well, you people can decide who are teaching biology. Now, how to teach is a question. First is very complex. Right? From where you start is a question, right? When you start teaching biology, from where do you start? Do you start from molecules, or do you start from the forest, right? From where do you start is a question, because it's very complex to start with. Even biologists themselves, consider it as very complex. Forget about the students or teachers or other scientists. Second is, let's say, example like a cell, right? Cell is extremely complex. I mean, we consider as human is more complex, we consider a tree is more complex, or a forest is more complex. Just look at one cell. All that goes on inside a cell, and the organization of very different cellular material, the molecules are, there's some kind of a crowding of molecule in one place, another type of molecule in another place within the cell. And considering the size of a protein, for example, in nanoscale, and a large cell, human cell, for example, can be up to 100 micron in dia. And the movement of these proteins within the cell is almost like we moving around in a city like Mumbai, right? So how do they navigate? How do they sort of, well organized? How from one cell you get two cells, exactly, two living cells? And how do they know how much to divide between the two cells, and how the genetic information is inherited of all of these things we learn when you study cells. Finally, cell itself is the living system, one single cell. We need to learn more about single cell rather than large multicellular organisms, which are macro, is easy to see for ourselves. But when you try to understand life, understand biology, we need to study cell, right? Now, so how do you study? Typically, there are ways you synthesize information in the classroom, or you analyze the information in the classroom. So can we study cell biology of molecules? So for example, start with a cell, it's made up of membrane, which are lipids. Then you go inside, it's another set of membranes like ER or other things. Then you say there's some nucleic acid, some proteins, some other carbohydrates, and so forth. Or should we start with DNA and then see what actually is surrounded by, and then we study, start putting together, and then say this is what is cell. But do we know enough about what is a minimal cell to call it as a living cell versus simply, a collection of molecules in one, little space? The second is, whatever we try to weigh is, the emergent property of a cell is life. You take all the components of the cell and put it in a test tube, it's not called as living system, right? It's not a living system, it's not life. But at the same time, because the living system is an emergent property of organization of those molecules in particular space, right? And in a little space. So obviously, we need to see whether can consider from molecules to put on very different molecules and say, suddenly now a new emergent property, now it is a living system. Until that, it's simply a collection of molecules. And what is a system, it's emergent property, all these things you can keep mentioning to students, and then actually explain the complexity of the system first. I don't think you should shy away from telling that it's a very complex system, because it is a complex system, right? And the complex system is very important for them to understand. Complex system is what we are all living today. The society is a complex system. Our traffic is much more complex. Our politics is even more complex. Sorry. Whatever you can consider, okay. And so, because these emergent properties are irreducible, right? And so, how do you teach, cell as, as a system, and from where synthesis was analysis, right? So, one possibility is you mix the two, right? You have to mix the two. There's no other way to teach a complex system. You have to first, let's say you bring out the problem first, say that, okay, if they're good, all these molecules you already know, let's say put all these molecules in the same concentration in a test tube, do you get a living system? Or if you say we already have a cell, you take out one by one and see when it loses the property of living system. So both ways you can start teaching them, so they will get some understanding in their own way. Students will make their own understanding of the complexity of a cell or the living system. You also need to bring in always some historical context. There is no way we can teach any subject without bringing out the process of how we came to know what we have known so far. If we are teaching in 2025 the biology lecture, we should bring out how we have come to know so much what we know as of 2025. It could be physics or chemistry, particularly in biology. We need to know some amount of it. You should not shy away from telling that there have been beliefs about life, and scientists with all the methods of science have actually showed that those beliefs are wrong, and we have actually discovered what is really reality about life and so forth. Some beliefs may have intuitively, or some in a macro level may have come out to be true in today's world, but that's different. That's because we have a human cognitive ability to make certain interpretation, certain way of logically trying to understand something, even if you didn't have experimental methods. Logical deduction was always used. In fact, many of them, astronomy and astrophysics research many times is a logical deduction of looking around the surrounding world and trying to understand, and later with the help of telescopes and other things we could actually make an empirical observation about the real world or your universe. So let me give you a 5 minutes overview of what is life, and which will encompass both genetics, molecular biology, cell biology, and evolution. So again, starting with history, we'll win one sentence each. For example, when people were started systematic understanding of biodiversity and life, they first tried to, let's simply classify them according to the similarities and differences. But the belief was all organisms were created in the way they are today. For some reasons, some are similar, some are differences, so let's only catalog them, right? That's what systematic started, or taxonomy. But natural historians, which the whole new field started around 18th century or beginning of 18th century or late 17th century, they were basically trying to understand the living system correlated to the geological locations where they are. So connecting to their habitat. For example, you have lions in Africa, lions in India, lions in in two different places. Are they similar or differences? Because they have different geoclimatic conditions. Similarly, the organisms or plants or animals living on mountains versus on the seashore. Is there any differences? Even they may be looking similar, but there are any differences. The differences are not only morphological; they are also started looking at life history traits, suggesting that perhaps there is some way the environment is impacting the way they are living, right? Because, and then also the morphology. If God has created exactly in the same way they are, right? You couldn't expect an environment to change what God has already created, right? So environmental impact on the morphological features immediately started what you call evolutionary thinking about life. And fast forward, you have genetics, Mendel's work in the middle of 19th century, 1850s. Mendel did a proper experiment. What Mendel was trying to discover is already known in a way. People knew that we inherit our parents in morphological features of parents, our grandparents. Sometimes we inherit something in the grandparent, but we don't have in our own parents, kind of a thing. People knew already that, but is there any pattern? Is there any fixed pattern about it? So what Mendel showed that yes, there is a fixed pattern, but it has an impact immediately. I mean, although Mendel's work was not known to other people for 50 years, as soon as it was rediscovered in the beginning of 20th century or late 19th century, people immediately extrapolated this to beyond few morphologically distinguishable features with naked eye. They actually said that what is the fixed pattern that Mendel discovered, that's laws of inheritance, is true for everything. When you are born as a living system first, then you are born as a human species, member of human species, and third is you are born with certain family-specific features because you carry some information or morphological features specific to your families from parents or from grandparents and so forth, right? So in a way, genetics gave an immediate idea of that, Mendelian work, gave an idea that you can start understanding life by looking at the birth of every individual. Because every time a new one is born, it is already inheriting all the features of life. There must be something in what is inherited. So that's where the so-called genetics and later molecular biology sort of developed. Now, cell was already, out of curiosity. People somehow invented, people knew what is magnifying glass. They were using magnifying glass. Sometime microscopy, almost done. Microscopy was invented. With the help of microscopy, you can magnify something. We can start seeing which is a world which is beyond, people had really realized it. And they discovered that there are bacteria and very different other forms of cells too. But initially, when they found out that cell is only, they thought it is a building block of life. And later they discovered that there are individuals, organisms, species, a large number of them, which actually free living single cells, right? Whether in bacteria, even eukaryotic cells like paramecium, amoeba, and so forth. So now, cell is just life in itself. So suddenly, instead of looking at a tree or a human or a mouse, you can actually start looking at individual cells to understand what is life, because it has all the features of a life, and it also, correlated to whether it is in the seawater or in the fresh water or in the soil or in the human blood and so forth. And also around the same time, the fantastic experiment that by done Pasteur realized that life is not created again and again. Life is not originating again and again. Life is inherited from other existing life, and when every time when his new life is born, it is coming from a pre-existing life, which immediately gave a lot of inputs about how to understand biology, how to understand living system. Whenever it happened, there's one origin of life, and what happens subsequently is evolution. That's exactly what Darwin was talking about in his book. And although Darwin and Mendel didn't know each other's work, but its synthesis later, it happened 20th century, immediately gave us a complete picture about the biodiversity around us. What Darwin said was already known to people, that every time a new set of generation is born, there are more variations than compared to the parental generation. Say, for example, in our own family, if I have, for example, in my family, we are 5 children to father and mother, 2 people producing 5 children. 5 children are so different. So there is more diversity than the 2 parents, right? So that diversity is the fuel for evolution. What evolution is nothing but, in changing environment, some variations reproduce more frequently, some are less frequently, and that's led to the continuous reiterative effort will change to lead to new morphological forms, what we call as species. And this also gave an idea of, I think I'll skip this, too much information. But very quickly, it's very interesting now, this is where one interesting integration happened in 20th century. Beginning of 20th century, when Mendel's work was rediscovered, what Mendel showed was a law of inheritance, right? Now, there is a fixed pattern in which characters are inherited from parental or generation to the offspring generation. And the 20th century also is, at the time, of course, Newtonian world was already 200-year-old. It was a more deterministic world. You can make certain predictions to the movement of objects if you know the initial conditions. One of the major conditions of Newtonian world is everything is made up of matter, right? If you have a fixed pattern, right, people immediately said it should be matter-based. Life cannot be independent of matter. Life is also an emergent property of the matter. That understanding came in the beginning of 20th century, and people started looking for what is gene inside a cell. They started looking for a matter which actually called gene. Until even in the scientists in 19th century, they always thought that what is life is something, an abstract phenomena, which is beyond the matter, beyond body. But the really looking for the very essence of life, which is based on matter, became a search in beginning of 20th century because of interaction between scientists, so-called interdisciplinary science, which emerged in 20th century. And then another fast forward in the next 50 years, and this is exactly what we are now, right? We have a complete understanding of the chemistry of life. All living organisms that exist today or existed earlier, even if you take from fossils, they have exactly the same chemistry of life. It also immediately tells you and clear that there's only one origin of life. There's only one particular cellular form of life which has originated, and that's continuously evolving, leaving us to all kinds of things. And this common thread across all organisms is this chemistry of life, which also tells today's engineers that how we can engineer You can look at a bacteria, look at a yeast, and look at humans or mouse. You can engineer very different metabolic pathways for health and agriculture purposes because the chemistry is exactly the same. A bacteria will not look at as human DNA. They look at only simply as a polymer of nucleotides, right? So that level of, finally at the cellular level, if you look at it, the similarities and differences are so less, differences are so less, similarities much more, whether the bacteria are human cell. At the morphological, at a macro level, the way we can see with our eyes, we see more differences than the similarities because we don't see molecular similarities between bacterial cell and a human cell. Okay, I'll skip all of these things. This is meant for a biology. I think I'll have to. We can teach Indians, I don't know why I kept so many things for a 50-minute talk. Okay. I'll strong come here, yeah? Perhaps I was thinking that I was giving a biology lecture here. So if you want to, for a biology teacher, it also helps with building the curriculum and the syllabus for the whole course, a 3-year degree or 4-year degree with multiple exit entry, whatever you think of, right? So one is, other than the foundation courses, that you need to have some understanding of society, some understanding of philosophy, history, civilization, and our constitution and everything. So in biology, you need to understand genetics, evolution, biochemistry, cell and molecular biology, and physiology. If these subjects are known, you can understand immunology, infectious diseases, cancer, diabetes, and nervous system, brain function, everything, whether it is related to plants, animals, ecology, forest, everything you can learn if you have understanding of these 5 subjects. Modern days, everybody should have computational skills. We will learn better understanding of the world with help of computers because we have a limited way of, analyzing the data. Communication skills is most important rather than WhatsApping in, WhatsApp language. I think its long writing is missing, so our teachers should somehow involve. Even if you are teaching biology, you are not teaching a language, I know, but you are not teaching English or the local language, but involve science writing while teaching biology because students should write and also make presentations. As students come and make such presentations, it could be group presentation. They can also make videos and then send out if you don't have time for them to come and if a 100-student lecture room, even if they can make small 5-minute video on some topic, right? And because anyway, everybody likes to talk to their mobile, so it's easy to make a small video. Research skills, as already discussed at length. Entrepreneurial, which is not about business, it's about actually resource management. These days, everybody has to manage resources. Waste management, something which Mayuri mentioned 2-3 times already. So resource management is important. That's all about entrepreneurship, right? And also being independent of, as much as possible in your own life comes when you learn how to do resource management. Entrepreneurial skill is nothing but being independent professionally. I'll stop here. Thank you very much. Sorry I took 5 minutes longer.
Thanks, Shashi, for taking us through a lot of different topics. We have 5 minutes. We can take a few questions. Yes, over there.
Thank you, sir, for this wonderful talk. I'm Priyanka Kishore. My question is a little bit deviation from, very wonderfully you have explained that what we should teach our students for future. But, sir, as in New Education Policy 2020, it's mentioned that whatever we are teaching to our student, we must acknowledge it through Indian knowledge system. So I'm from biology background. If I want to teach my students any topic related with biology, but we need to give some references or that content should be in some textbook. But we don't have any textbook or references that is available in India right now that can relate many biological concepts with our Indian knowledge system. This is a big problem that literally I'm facing.
So, the Indian knowledge system is it doesn't encompass everything that is there in our modern days, right? So knowledge system, whatever it was that time, was related to that particular time, whatever the few people were discovered something and then understood the world about it. But now millions and millions of scientists over the last 4,000 years, whatever they have discovered, it will be somewhat different, much more detailed. So obviously, not everything will be in the knowledge system what you teach today. If you are to, there is a separate course on Indian knowledge system. Some experts may teach in that one. But if you want to bring in an example, right? There are multiple ways you can bring an example. In fact, I already showed one picture in the very beginning when I say what is life. I didn't explain this, but it was very obvious. It is not, see, knowledge system is not necessarily what is written in some script, right? Knowledge system is what people had a perception about it. So-called traditional system, right? Understanding. For example, this is the traditional understanding of life of Gond tribes in Madhya Pradesh, right? This is called Gond art. I'm sure many of you know, right? If you look at this, it gives you some idea about what could have been their perception about life around them, right? So, I mean, this can be beginning of trying to tell them, the students, what is life? You can start asking the question, showing this one. This is also part of the Indian knowledge system.
Yes, sir. But like Darwin's theory, and we have Vishnu avatars. So if I want to teach my students,
that is not knowledge system. That's not knowledge. Knowledge. What is knowledge versus what is information? What is beliefs? What is myth? When you say knowledge system, for example, Ayurveda is considered a knowledge system because there is lots of, explanation has been, causal explanation has been given to very different things. Simply if you say this is what exists, this is how it is, without giving any explanation, is not a knowledge. Right? Ayurveda is, for example, there are books and books on Ayurveda which is actually given explanation. There is some explanation is true, some explanation may not be true in modern understanding. We know it may not be true. It doesn't matter. Every science also progresses there. Right? We burst old understanding and then come out with a new understanding. But when you say knowledge system, Vishnu avatar is not a knowledge system.
Okay. Yeah. I'll take one question on this side.
Very thought-provoking talk. My question is, while I see where NEP comes from and the need for preparing our students for future and in-house teacher training and whatever, the internships, etc., are we taking away from the students and the teachers the time that is required for them to mull over the information, internalize it, ruminate, and convert it to knowledge? Are we jam-packing our schedules?
No. That's what I'm telling you. In fact, if NEP says decentralize the curriculum and the syllabi at undergraduate, I'm not talking about the school, because school requires some more centralized, because we are preparing the whole kids which are completely blank slate as a citizen of the country. School education is somewhat different, but an undergraduate program, we can actually have that autonomy, right? Then you don't need to teach so much. I'm telling you, right? Students can actually learn whatever they want to learn, from their mobile when it is required, that information, right? What they need to learn, how to learn. So the methods of science should be more important than the content of science. That's what I kept saying.
But we are still bound by the curriculum, right?
If you design your own curriculum, you decide how much you want to teach. For example, I don't need to learn neurobiology the entire 3-year undergraduate program if I'm a biology major, because neurobiology I can learn more later on my own if I know enough physiology and biochemistry. There's one.
Okay, one quick question here.
You said in our country the education is largely dictated by the textbook. A textbook-driven culture is there, and textbooks are often structured around concepts or topics like Newtonian mechanics, electrodynamics in physics. So this, if you want to bring this practice orientation, the structuring of the education system in terms of textbooks and textbooks being structured in terms of content topics, there is an inherent contradiction there, right? Or something that is...
So I think physicists have solved this problem. I know. Physics is much older and much more fixated on certain view of the world, right? And biology is continuously evolving. In fact, the latest textbook, for example, some of the fantastic textbook in biology will not start with simply saying that what Aristotle said or what Mendel said or what Lamarck or Darwin. You will not go in a chronological sequence of discoveries or statements.
But even if you at undergraduate level,
biology starts with, it's actually, back and forth in a higher levels of complexity, lower level complexity, and kind of thing, and then how they were discovered.
Okay, thank you.
Guys, discussions later. It's already 12 o'clock. We have another session starting right away. You can catch him. He's around. You can catch him at lunch. You can ask him all your questions and comments and,
Thank you.